Hello everybody and welcome to this new video about the blockchain group. Europe's MSTR could ALTBG.PA, PA like Paris. Could this be Europe's MSTR? Could this be Europe's leading Bitcoin company, Bitcoin treasury company? That's what we're going to talk about. I will conclude this video talking about their 10 billion euro raise plan. But first, let me tell you why I'm talking about the blockchain group today. You may find this odd. You know, there's a few BTC treasury companies in Singapore. There's Metaplanet in Japan. Why am I not covering those? Why am I covering blockchain group, right? So reason number one, of course, is I have many European viewers. In fact, it's about 40% of the channel. And another point is I have no Japanese expertise. I can't really help with that. But I potentially could be of some help analyzing a French company, being, you know, being that I was born and raised and educated there and all you want. I've been in the US for about 15 years. I came to the US in my early 20s. So I think I have some remembrance of what's going on over there, and I can talk about it a little bit in the context of this BTC treasury company. So that's reason number one. Lots of European viewers, and again, I am French, you know, so I can help analyze that. Point number one. Reason number two, it's a prerequisite for me whenever I cover a stock. The prerequisite is that the stock is cheap. It's got to be kind of cheap. And blockchain is kind of cheap. Blockchain group is kind of cheap. What do I mean by that? Okay, nominal price doesn't matter, right? €1, that doesn't matter. It's 111 million market cap. So in absolute, that's inexpensive. But that is not how you value a company's cheapness. You value it in the case of Bitcoin treasury companies, you value it with the price to NAV. What is the price to NAV of the blockchain group? Well, it's roughly, depending on the on the time of the week and the season, it's roughly 2 times MNAV, 2 times price to NAV. It's what it's trading at. The blockchain group is trading at about the same premium as MSTR. It's very surprising when you consider the fact that this stock has done a 10x, roughly a 10x, a little more than a 10x in less than a year. It's actually pretty pleasing to see that it's only trading in line with MSTR on a price to NAV basis, even though it has had outstanding performance. If you go on bitcointreasuries.net, great website, they say it's a 2.15. You know, when I calculate it, I get up to about a 2x price to NAV. It is a good third cheaper, for example, than Metaplanet. Metaplanet is a 3x price to NAV. And there is a lot to be said about these companies potentially trading at a higher price to NAV than MicroStrategy, be it Metaplanet or the blockchain group, because of the nature of the investors that buy the stock, because they have to buy a European stock in their mandate. They have to buy, say, a Japanese traded stock for Metaplanet, you know, and sometimes you have to buy a stock in your country if you want to have certain tax advantages. And so this is going to lead to my point number 3. But before I do, let me tell you this. Will I be buying? No, I won't be buying. There's no easy way for me to own a French stock. I don't know how to do that. I remember back in the early days, I used to have a PEA. I'm going to pronounce it the French way, a PEA. I used to have a PEA, but I closed it. I closed it before I moved to the US is when I closed it. So I don't have that account anymore. And of course, I have no financial interest in France whatsoever, right? It's being a US taxpayer, it's US tax law. I have no financial economic interest in France whatsoever. So I have no way to own this. I have no way to own it. So will I be buying? No. And I don't think it's that easy actually to get a thinly traded stock like this still. I don't think it's that easy to get that on US exchanges. But what if, let's play parallel universes here, and let's say, what if I still lived in France? Would I be interested in this stock if I still lived in France? And the answer to that is, you bet I would be interested in this stock if I still live in France. Because, and this is the kicker, right? MicroStrategy and most foreign stocks, most US stocks, are not eligible for taxed advantage accounts. And you may say, well, wait a minute, you can buy whatever you want over there, right? You can buy MicroStrategy. Yeah, but you're not going to be in a taxed advantage account. Do you know the tax rate in France? Do you know the capital gains tax rate? Do you know the income tax rate? Don't look it up. It is scary. A lot of people in France, therefore, are looking at tax advantage accounts. And I know plenty of friends from my university days in France, plenty of my friends still living over there, will only consider investing in tax advantage accounts. Over there, tax advantage accounts are crucial. It's a big deal. And the best tax advantage account in France that you have available is called the PEA, right? The PEA is the best tax advantage account. Look at Blockchain Group. Blockchain Group is eligible for the PEA. Look at MicroStrategy, right? My number one position, my number one stock, ineligible to the PEA. So this means that if you were to, God forbid, do some capital gains of MicroStrategy in France, you would be hit very hard with a tax bill. On the other hand, if you were to do a nice capital gain on the Blockchain Group in France, and you held it in a tax advantage account, which a lot of French people prefer, believe me on that one, you would be only hit with a very, very nice CSG, CRDS social tax, as they call it, which initially was supposed to be a temporary tax, but they never removed it, so never fall for somebody telling you a tax is temporary. You would only pay 17% tax, right? And so in the US, depending on your tax bracket, capital gains tax is between 15 and 20%. For a regular account, you would essentially, on average, have the same taxation as in the US if you buy your Bitcoin in the PEA, right? If you buy your Bitcoin in the PEA, you can essentially have US-like taxation. But of course, there's no Bitcoin ETF in France, obviously. So how do you get exposure to Bitcoin? Well, all of a sudden, you have a stock that is eligible for the PEA, which is likely going to have a performance that is going to be somewhat correlated to Bitcoin. This is why I think this stock is a big deal. Another bonus on the PEA, of course, is that you don't have the wealth tax. Yes, France has a wealth tax. This is something that a lot of foreigners forget, but there is a wealth tax. Granted, right now, the wealth tax is only on real estate, but every political campaign in France, they talk about putting the wealth tax back on all sorts of their assets. And in my view, they will, because they have like a $40 billion hole in the budget over there. And in my view, they will. It's very popular among French politicians to talk about the wealth tax, to raise the wealth tax, impôt sur la fortune, as they call it. It's like super popular. And so if you have your assets in a tax advantage account, you're shielded from the wealth tax and you're shielded from the income tax. The only thing you have is the social tax, which is 17%. So if you live in France, you bet I find this interesting. I also want to talk about this, which is, can you own raw Bitcoin in France? Of course, you still can own raw Bitcoin in France, but we're still trying to figure out what's going to happen with MICA and if it's going to be introduced as it is or not. A lot of wallets where you could hold your Bitcoin are potentially going to be non-compliant, right? And raw Bitcoin is actually an easy target, an easy target for taxation, while taxation on a company, on a stock, is very, very well established and less likely to change than taxation on an asset like Bitcoin, which seems like an easy asset to tax, right? And believe me, there's a few things the French are good at. One of the things the French are very good at is taxes. World leader in taxation. When Greece had issues, and when the IMF showed up to Greece and Greece couldn't raise taxes, they had a French government cohort go to Greece to teach the Greek how to collect taxes on the Greek. The French are very good at collecting taxes, which is why the PEA is the PEA, right? I think that's a big deal. And so I think this stock is very interesting from that standpoint. Very interesting from that standpoint. You can hold it in the PEA, and you're going to be shielded from your taxes. So now that you have the free reason why I talk about it, many European viewers, it's cheap, and it's tax advantage over there. Let's talk about it now that you see the main reason, I think, that why this stock is interesting. So let's talk about it. So They are positioning themselves as the blockchain group, the European version of MicroStrategy. They're placing MetaPlanet as the Asia, I should really say Japanese, because there's Singapore companies that do Bitcoin, there's Hong Kong companies that do Bitcoin, so they should have said Japanese here, but that's okay. MetaPlanet may be the Japanese version of the Bitcoin treasury company. America, of course, is Strategy, and Strategy is the world's Bitcoin treasury company, because really American assets can be owned in a lot of countries over than America, right? A lot of Europeans, for 40% of you watch my channel who are European, you own US stocks. You can do that, right? So Strategy is America/world, but MetaPlanet is compliant with the Japanese rails, and the blockchain group is compliant with the French rails, and more largely the Euronext Euro rails. And of course, this is almost just, this is exactly like Michael Saylor's rules, right? Michael Saylor's rules essentially raise capital, accumulate Bitcoin, hold Bitcoin forever, don't lose the Bitcoin, don't sell the Bitcoin. The promises of Michael Saylor at the end of the MSTR presentation, at the end of each MSTR conference call now, that's the same, right? So they have the same principles. The CEO of this company actually just tweeted about 24 hours ago a picture of him with Michael Saylor right now in Las Vegas. So anyways, and let's look at the performance. And the performance, of course, has more than outperformed Bitcoin by quite a bit, plus 470% to 74%. Bitcoin only 30%, and the BTC yield, of course, has been absolutely outstanding. We'll talk about the BTC yield in a second. Although, to be fair, don't be fooled by seeing 700% BTC yield written. You're starting from a low base, right? You're starting from a very low base. In fact, 50 million for MicroStrategy, that's a 0.1% yield. 50 million for them, well, that's a tremendous yield because of such a low base. So these numbers don't really mean much because we are starting from such a low base on this company. Like I said, they only have about 620 Bitcoin, so only about 50 million worth of Bitcoin. So anyways, moving on. Let's move on. So, the operating business, we're going to briefly talk about it. This is actually a very similar situation to MicroStrategy. It's an old company, started in 2008. And they're in the app development business and they're in the consulting business. And you can see that the company has had declining revenue between 23 and 24. They've stabilized that and they've been able to restructure and they've been able to generate income. So they have about 1.3 million in net income. I typically use EBITDA, so let's call it about $1 million in cash flow for this company. Again, that's I think we're about to escape the point where this matters. This could still matter a little bit that it's a 100 million market cap company. So because it's a 100 million market cap company, this could still matter just a teeny tiny bit. You'd have something like a Palantir-like valuation. But if the blockchain group gets valued into the 200 or 300 million, this business will have to be ignored and will not matter anymore. At least that is my point of view. I'm sure the founders of the company love these businesses, but at this point, you're a Bitcoin treasury company. The Bitcoin strategy is the more important strategy. Let us move on to the backers, and this is where it gets impressive. Adam Back. You have Adam Back's backing. So think about 21 Capital with Jack Mallers, one of the Bitcoin OGs, one of the most adamant proponent of Bitcoin is behind 21 Capital. Adam Back, one of the top 3 possible Satoshis out there, along with Hal Finney, and I can't remember who, that guy from the Netherlands, anyways, or from Belgium, Sassaman. Like there's like 3 people that people are arguing could be Satoshi. Adam Back is one of these people who could be, who some people argue is Satoshi. Anyways, we're not gonna get there. The Bitcoin OG among all of the Bitcoin OGs, the OG of all of the OGs, is backing this company and has invested in this company. This is a big deal. They also have a pretty big asset manager invested in there, in France at least. $2 billion more than $2 billion in asset management. They were one of the first one to offer for family offices. They offered a Bitcoin product back in 2017 for family offices. So at least two strategic investors that I recognize, especially Adam Back. This is like, how did they get Adam Back on board? This is absolutely outstanding. And you can see that the president of the Bitcoin Treasury Strategies, right, their CEO, is well connected. So this is BFM Business. So BFM Business is like the French CNBC. I mean, it's very close to it. And he was invited. He was invited there, and I saw him invited there multiple times. I think it's 2 times, maybe more than 2 times. He was invited there on the main French CNBC. So again, even though the blockchain group seems to be trying to have a worldwide appeal, they have been also discussed on the French language channels and the French language. I didn't see it much on YouTube channels, but at least the French mainstream news has made it to the French mainstream news. This is again a big deal. This is external validation. So there's a lot of green flags. How are they doing? So they diluted their shares year to date from 95 million to 186 million. So of course, you double the number of shares outstanding. That's bad. How much did you double the Bitcoin by? Well, you 14x'd your Bitcoin. So very accretive. But once again, keeping in mind the fact that this is the law of large numbers, this is not always going to be like this as we get into bigger numbers. But for now, dilution has worked. And again, if you wonder how dilution works, I've made many videos about this as to how dilution allows you to acquire Bitcoin for a Bitcoin treasury company. I will link my video on the MicroStrategy ATM in the description for this video. Feel free to go watch it. It's always important to go back to that, because whenever I make these videos, people say dilution bad, and they have, I guess I could call it dilution derangement syndrome, and they say dilution bad. And so no, actually, when you're trying to acquire Bitcoin, dilution is important, because that's how you can add to the permanent capital of the company. Let's talk about how they fundraise and how they plan on fundraising. So equity in private placement, Bitcoin convertible bonds, this is the biggest way that they've raised, and share subscription warrants. And this is where I have a few things to say. I am no French financial markets expert, and there's a few things that I don't understand. And so if you understand more, feel free to say in the comment section. But there's a few things that I don't really understand in this. And it's the French BSA. So BSA is a form of warrant, bon de souscription d'action. It's a form of warrant, right? It's a share subscription warrant. And I am confused. I don't really understand. It's okay. So they're rewarding the shareholders. They decided to give warrants to their shareholders to A, thank them, and then to B, accelerate buys. And so they gave these warrants, which are going to be quoted separately. 7 BSA warrants give you the right to purchase one share at 54 cents. So these warrants are in the money. And, I understand what they're saying. So it's a gift to the shareholders. And I'll get to a reason as to why I think they did that, and I think it's about corporate governance, and I think it's a story of control and corporate governance, but I'm not so sure. Anyways, I don't have a problem with companies rewarding shareholders. Believe me, I've owned MicroStrategy, I've owned HIMS, I've owned Tesla, I've owned a lot of stocks, but I've rewarded shareholders. Rewarding shareholders is never ever a problem in my book. It's always a good thing. But the secondary reason why they did that, of course, is that when those rights are exercised, right, you're going to get 54 cents into the business, right? You're going to get 54 cents of cash into the business whenever those rights are exercised to buy the shares. And so the question is, how many of those shares will be exercised? Well, likely all of them, right? Because you're in the money. So likely all of them will be exercised. And so when they did this, that was probably a way for them to give some money to the shareholders, but if the shareholders want to get the money, they need to exercise the warrants or sell them on the open market, sell those warrants in the open market to someone who will exercise them at some point. But these warrants will be exercised at some point. So it's getting money into the business, and it's also rewarding the shareholders. But if you look at the 54 cents number, it's very interesting, because the convertible bonds, right, the convertible debt that they issued where they raised 600 Bitcoin, and they did it in the reverse, which is very interesting. They didn't raise fiat to buy Bitcoin. They raised Bitcoin directly from a bunch of companies who directly contributed Bitcoin, and then they gave the convertible debt. And that convertible debt also includes a warrant, right? I don't know how they call it, but it's a form of, it's a right to buy the stock for cheap, and it includes that right to buy the stock for cheap, whether they call it a warrant or BSA, I don't know, but it's also at 54 cents per share. So we have a lot of buying pressure potentially coming in at 54 cents per share. The stock is trading at $1. Yes, it's dilutive, but it's also cash that's going to get into the business and that is also going to buy Bitcoin. So anyways, that's kind of the way I look at it, and this is where I think this ties it all up together. So in the grand scheme of things, as you know, I have no issue with rewarding insiders, rewarding early investors, and dilution, as long as it is accretive, I have no issue with in the grand scheme of things. But I think one of the bigger reasons why there are so many warrants going on in this company is, and I'm not a French corporate governance expert, but from what I understand, the public and the institutional float is 83% of the votes, right? And you know, and again, I know in the U.S. often in the U.S. institutional investors don't vote on their shares. I don't know how it works in France. Do institutional investors vote on their shares in France, or do they not? So one of the things that I see here is, because of all of these warrants, they may exercise these warrants in order to tilt the ownership balance in a different way, and you can see that really Fulgur Ventures, and I have to understand how they ended up with only warrants for Fulgur Ventures. They're going to have 36% of the capital. They must have contributed a lot of Bitcoin, right? Adam Back's ownership is going to move from 3.9% to 10%, right? Tobam, UTXO from 0 to 1%, from 0 to 2%. And so new ownership of shares will come, and as a result of that, the institutional share of the ownership will be only 42%, which means that if all of these warrants get exercised, all of a sudden you have enough voting power to vote on this. Vote on this, on the $10 billion. It's technically not an ATM. We don't have much details. I'm sure there's going to be some ATM. I'm sure there's going to be some convertible debt, maybe straightforward standard debt. I don't really know all sorts of instruments. But anyways, we're talking about a vote for raising 10 billion euros. And so, you know, the question comes down to, how easy is it to get this approved in France? I don't know. I have no idea how easy it is to get this approved. But it's pretty stunning, especially when you consider the ambition, the fundraising ambition compared to the size of a company. This is only a $100 million company. They want to raise 10 billion euros. So again, I think this is not in the bag. They have to do it, but I think this is the reason why this ownership data is given, and why these warrants were given. I think that's the reason, because they want to be able to vote. They want to be able to vote on the stuff, and this is one of these situations where having huge insider ownership actually probably helps you get these things passed, right? People often tell me about MicroStrategy. Well, what if shareholders vote against the new ATM, etc.? Well, guess what? Michael Saylor owns 45% of the business. So because Michael Saylor owns 45% of MSTR, whatever is up to a vote is going to pass, essentially, because the other owners of the stock are either all in into Bitcoin, or they're retail investors who are all in into the business, etc. So I think this is quite interesting. If they get this passed, this could be a game changer for this company. So conclusion is, I think price to NAV around 2 is cheap, but we need to keep in mind that there's a counterparty, and it's the convertible debt. There's a counterparty to that price to NAV being cheap, right? Not all of the funds are part of a permanent capital structure much of these funds have debt corresponding to it in the form of a convertible. So the funds have not been raised via an ATM, like Michael Saylor. And over a short term, this matters. Over a long term, of course, if Bitcoin does a 10x, this doesn't matter over a long run. But over a short term, this matters a little bit, unless you're MSTR. If you're MSTR, that really doesn't matter because most of the money that you've raised has been raised through permanent capital. It's been mostly permanent capital. And so in that case, it's been raised through ATM, so you're okay. It's permanent. But if you raise money via debt, you have debt corresponding to that money. So keep in mind that price to NAV has a caveat to it, which is the debt. But that only matters in the short term. In the long term, if you think Bitcoin's doing a 20x, you should just look at the price to NAV. That's my view. Okay, second, MSTR is still king for me and will always be the king. And frankly, of course, no investor can be blamed for saying this because look at MSTR, right? MSTR has literally changed the game, and so early buyers, mid-cycle buyers, MSTR for me is always going to remain the king, but knowing full well, if you're in France and you have these high tax rates and you have a PEA, wow, that's appealing to you, this company, right? Blockchain Group is appealing to you if you can only invest via a PEA, okay? So if I was still living in France, I would find it very compelling, and mostly that due to a PEA eligibility. And I think Alexandre should go on French YouTube channels, and he should probably talk about how ownership works and how you can own it in a tax advantage account. And if they get the $10 billion capital raise approved, this could be a game changer. This company could generate very high Bitcoin yield if they actually got that approved. And France is a land with a lot of cash savers, a lot of money in assurance vie, which is essentially just bonds that pay next to nothing. But tax advantage, right? And so stock market participation is very low. But Bitcoin is getting a lot of people into investing. It's getting a lot of people who would not have invested otherwise into buying stocks and potentially buying Bitcoin. But in the case of France, buying stocks from a tax standpoint is much more interesting. And keep in mind this background. The French people love tax shelters. They love a tax advantage account. When I was growing up, it was all about PEA. PEA was so much better than a compte titre. Everybody wanted to PEA. I remember 18 years old. Everybody was like, you got to open a PEA at 18. That way you start the clock. So again, this is what I would emphasize. And it would be also good to note whether is there any other countries in Europe that give you a tax advantage for owning a Euronext stock or for owning a EU-based stock. And my guess is there are, but I don't know all of the tax advantage from country to country. So anyways, this was not investment advice, not financial advice, not tax advice, just entertainment. Hoping you were entertained. Please like, please subscribe, follow me on Patreon, follow me on X. Thank you for watching, and have a wonderful, wonderful day.